obviously the first question is it best to tailor projects towards funding or to look for funding that will enable us to do what we want? I think it's that's sort of the paradox of where, where do you start with, I think.
Yeah, well, I think the answer is a little bit of both, but with a leaning towards doing what you want to a degree. I think it's always dangerous to not do what it is that you want to do. If you find a fund and you're having to make a completely new project based on it, you might get the funding, but what I find more often than not is that people end up doing a project they don't want to do. Everyone's unhappy. It takes you away from what it is that you want to do, and you might be getting money to do that, but you're losing time to do what it is that you want to do as a company. So I think it's dangerous to chase funding. I can give you plenty of examples, probably not for recording, of projects where people have chased funding and it's not gone well. I think the thing to remember about all funders, and this will run through, I'm sure, all my answers, is that they have a very particular set of things that they want their funding to achieve. And if you can't match that, or if you're having to do too much to try and appease them, as I say, I just don't think that's necessarily a good way to go. However, having said that, at the same time, you can't often do exactly what it is that you want to do, because there's just not going to be the funding out there to do precisely the exact project you want. So more what I do with a lot of organizations, and I do with my own work, is looking at the project you want to do and just trying to explore it from all different angles. What are the different themes that are in there? You might not think it's important, but what are some different things that you might be able to draw out of that might be able to appeal to a funder? So for example, if you're, let's just say you're doing a theatre production and it's about, I don't know, different generations in a family. Is there something in that you might not have thought about that might be about dementia? Is there something in that you might not have thought about that's about loneliness? Is there something in that you might not have originally thought about that's to do with, women or children or whatever it might be? Just look at that project you want to do and just try and tease out as many different themes and areas as possible, and then see what funding might suit that. I think that's more of a better way to go. So I wouldn't necessarily just completely chase the funding, but you can't just rely on your project piquing everyone's interest. Spend the time to
find the bits of our projects that fit the brief that people are looking for anyway. Don't specifically go for them, sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when you are applying to those funders, you just got to make sure that you're playing up to the elements of your project that they're interested in. With pretty much everything I apply for in terms of projects or festivals or whatever it might be, each funder's getting a slightly different application. Someone's interested in X, and so we play up to that. Someone's interested in Y, so we really play up to that. And for me, that's the way that you're most successful. That's going to widen who you can go to, and it also means that you're not having to change your plans completely to fit in with someone else. So, I think for me, that's the best way to go if you can.
Amazing. So I think the next question is, what stage of a production is best for funders? So if we're applying for people funding, do they want a complete project that's ready to go, or do they want just like the sort of ideas and we're asking for funding to support that, or do they need to know that so we can like deliver on it?
Yeah, the vast majority of time funders will want something that's very concrete. And the reason for that is that, as I said before, funders exist for a particular reason, to give out money for a particular purpose. So what they want to make sure is that you can deliver on those outcomes that they want to see and that you've promised. If you're going to someone with an idea, if you're going to someone with very early stage R&D, it's much harder for them to see that. Your project is a much greater risk of achieving the outcomes that they want to achieve. So it is always a lot easier to go with a concrete proposal. If you are looking, or if there's a particular fund that is research and development, or you're going to the Arts Council for a small pot of money to start work on something, the important thing there is to really tell them the story of what it is you want to do eventually. I don't think you can ever really go to someone and say, we've had this idea, we think it might be fun, can we have some money? It's got to be, here's an idea, we think it can be fun, and our long-term vision for this is that it will tour, that we'll have this many outputs, that will have these sort of themes and outcomes. You need to, it might be the initial idea you need money for, but you need to sell them on the long-term vision.
Yeah.
So yeah, in essence, something that's fuller and concrete most of the time it's going to be easier.
Hmm.
If it is a particular R&D put, or that's absolutely what you need money for, make sure you know what the long-term vision might be that you can sell. You can't just rely on that initial kernel of an idea.
Yeah. Brilliant. So just off that, just going to my head. So if it's something that you're still developing, is it worth to try and create things like maybe a little kind of filming clips or creating visuals for something to help illustrate ideas that might not be as simple? Is that a good way of doing it, or is it best just to plow as you were going?
It certainly can be. The problem with a lot of funders, but particularly sort of trust and foundation charitable funders, is they tend to be quite old-fashioned.
Oh,
Often you might only be able to give people something in words. You might not be able to rely on those things, and even with someone like the Arts Council, there's actually very little of that information you can give them. So some others might accept it, but some others won't. The other thing about funders as well is, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was that if you're thinking about a funder, they're sitting there sometimes every day with a pile of 100 things on their desk. How is it that your application, A, is going to stand out, and B, on a very simple thing, is just very easy for them to read and understand? If in the first two sentences you're trying to sell them some amazing but weird and wacky idea that doesn't really make any sense, to be honest, that's just going to go in the bin, because they haven't got the time, the attention span to work it out. So whatever it is that you're doing, can you just sell it really, really clearly? Give them some very simple, concrete things that they can easily grasp hold of. And this is particularly true more and more as arts companies. We're trying to go out to more traditionally non-arts funders. We need to be able to talk to them in a very simple language that they can grasp what it is that we're trying to achieve. I think also something to say is that it is also very difficult. Yes, difficult to get money for initial R&D, but let's say you've got a project where you want to do R&D, then you want to do further development, and then the final thing comes. It's so hard to get money for a project that has got those sorts of various stages. If you're trying to go for a second R&D project, most funders will say, well, you've already had funding for this, or where are these final outputs? It's really, really challenging. So in that kind of thing, the best thing to do probably is to try and start off with a project idea that sells people on that full journey of the project. We're going to have one R&D, and then we're going to have another period 6 months later once we've done X, Y, Z, and then it's going to go into the final thing. Funders don't like to think they're funding something that's happened before.
Okay. Yeah.
So again, it goes back to the early point. Try and sell them on what the long-term vision is. Be very clear on how it is you're eventually going to achieve that goal.
Yeah. Brilliant. So that brings into the next question, which is, are there any sort of do nots or common pitfalls for people when they're starting to writing fundraising bids? So what are the common mistakes that people make?
So one of them, I think, is just what I've said, is making sure that something makes sense. It's so easy for us, and I find this particularly with, not always, but often with artists who are having to write their own funding bids, because that's how it is most of the time. The idea is so clear in your head, you know why it's fantastic. You try and put it down on paper, and someone else reads it, and it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Always think of that idea of that poor, I say poor, or that grant funder that sat there with 100 applications every day, trying to get through them all. Can they easily grasp what it is that you want to do? From the very first sentences, it's super clear what it is that you want to do. So whether that's you writing something and getting someone else to read it, or what I often do with my work is that I'll be working, all day on an application, and then I'll give it a couple of days, and then I'll try and come back to it. It's just so easy to get your head in stuff. So just try and get that distance as much as you can. I'd say this is especially tricky if people are looking at Arts Council funding, particularly the new Arts Council project grants. So as some people may know, they kind of redid their application forms late last year, and now there is only a tiny amount of information you can put in about what your project actually is. Most of the application form is telling you how your project is going to help meet the Arts Council's goals. So in that, it's very easy to be trying to talk about goals and outcomes and all sorts of things, and not be very clear in what it is you actually want to do. That's kind of one example, but there are plenty of others as well. So I think the main one is just people just being far too heads in a project to make it come across on paper. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think that's the main one, really, and I see it time and time again.
So would you just, sorry, while I'm thinking of that, so would you say if you are working in like a team with people, it isn't just you, is it better to try and get someone who's maybe not, in theatre cases, like directing or being directly in the, like head in it, someone maybe more on the outside to like have a first go at that?
Yeah, absolutely. If you can do, the different funders are different. Obviously, if you're talking to the Arts Council, someone reading that will be artsy. They will understand a bit more about what you're talking about. It still doesn't mean your idea might not be clear, but they'll kind of get a grasp of the art form. As I said before, more and more we're trying to go to funders outside of the arts. We're trying to make the case for the arts. What they do in terms of people's general health and well-being and social cohesion and all these sorts of things. Those kind of grant funders reading your application will not be in an arts world. So the more that you can do, either very consciously yourself try and step away from it, or whether it's bringing in a friend or a family member or whoever it might be to try and read something and just go, do you understand what it is that we're trying to do? That's always great if you've got someone that can do that for you.
Yeah. So next question we've got is, so this is a bit more specific to us, I think. So when we're looking at venues, they often need booking far in advance before we all have funding. Is it worth applying for funding with, so say if we know like a venue needs a specific amount of money to hire it, is it worth applying with that specific amount in mind, but then knowing that we might not get the funding or things might change? Or is it better just to have, say, like look at the average of a few of them, pick a number and say, we think this is how much we'd need to have for a venue? Is it better to be specific or try and cover the bases?
It definitely the former. As I said, funders like certainty. They like to know that you've been to the venues, you've spoken to them, maybe you've got the dates penciled, you know how much it costs. They don't like wishy-washy. And it comes back to that idea of risk. What they're doing is they are trusting you to use their money properly, for want of a better word. So they want to know you've done your research. They want to know that the figures you're giving them are correct. The less that you can tell them precise, the more risky you are. However, having said that, it's not uncommon for us to write, I say us, for people to write things in arts applications that, you've looked at lots of different venues, you put the costs down, but maybe you actually haven't spoken to some of those venues, you just looked on their website, or maybe some of them, the costs are roughly right, but not quite. This just goes in this Zoom, but if you can give the funder a sense of confidence that you have done the research and spoken to people, even if you haven't quite been able to, give them that sense of confidence that you have. So again, thinking particularly about the Arts Council, but if you go into the Arts Council for a tour, say, you have to list all of your venues, and you say, is it confirmed? Is it not confirmed? They'll look really badly on it if everything is not confirmed. If you haven't spoken to anyone, sometimes to say you've spoken to someone when maybe you haven't. Between us on the Zoom, let's just do that. So that great sense of certainty, precise costs is absolutely the way to go. I don't think many people would give you money if you were sort of roughly banding some figures around. It's not gonna.
I suppose as well, if you've shown at least that you can organize and speak to people already, even if that venue falls through, it shows that you already know what you're doing with that. So I suppose that's a bonus as well.
Yeah, and look, it is really tricky. I mean, this is more from an operational side than a fundraising side. But as you said, so many times with projects, you need to commit to costs and whatnot before you can actually get the money. It is really difficult. But funders are in that weird situation where they want you to have things confirmed. So however you try and tell them that story in a way that works for you, give them certainty.
Brilliant. The final question we've got here is just, what are your top tips for things we could be doing regularly to be successful? So like kind of one of the I can't remember who put this one down, but I pictured like a thumbnail for a YouTube video of like top daily tips for a good fundraiser or something. But just what kind of habits do you think, or things we should be doing regularly when we're looking for things?
Yep. So I've written a couple of things down, a couple of top tips. So the first one's very obvious, which is keep an eye out for opportunities. Sign up to funding alerts. I'm sure there's some local ones that you can sign up to. I actually sign up to some weird ones all around the country in places that I don't even work, but I happen to know they have good sort of funding bulletins. So there's a particularly good one for some of the work I do with disabilities that's in Kent. I don't do any work in Kent, but they have a really great funding database. So make sure you signed up to things. Here where I live in West Yorkshire, we've got things like the Bradford Producing Hub. You might not be doing any work in Bradford, but they've got a really good funding bulletin. Sign up to it. Just keep on top of opportunities. Make sure you know what they are. Make a date in the diary if something is coming up. Cultivating relationships is really, really important, and that's sort of one of the fundraising kind of buzz terms that we always use. Cultivating relationships. That basically means if you've made contact with a funder once, even if they've said no, make sure to keep them in touch. Make sure to keep inviting them to things. Make sure to keep that relationship ticking along. That's important for funders. It's also important for your audiences as well. Not just so the audiences keep coming back, but you don't know who those audiences are. The amount of times that there's been a nice stereotype little old lady that's come to a few shows, and then suddenly there's a check in the post for X thousands of pounds.
Yeah,
it's because you just kept that relationship going. You don't know where it's going to go. So whether it's funders or audiences, just keep those ticking over. Keep people in the know. Keep people with your company. One that I would always say is through your comms channels. Keep that funding message out there. Whether you're a charity or you're not a charity, as arts companies, we all need money. Just don't let people kind of forget that fact. It doesn't have to be done in a really sort of in-your-face way, but I think just keep that message current, so that when the time comes that you're making an ask or you're trying to do a campaign, it's in kind of people's minds that you're a company that is in need of support. So I would always try and keep that ticking along. If you're in a period where you're not applying for funding, or you're just kind of doing general research or whatever it might be, I would make sure to be really hot on your organization's data and assets. So when those opportunities come, you're really clear on who your audiences are. You're really clear on what the outputs on your recent work has been. You've got a folder. Every organization I work for, I have a Word document which is called like useful quotes, and it's just a big long list of everything from the press, everything from artists, everything from audiences, participants, so that there's just that base there that I can pull out stuff whenever I need to. So always stay on top of the data side. We spoke about funders and then wanting certainty. The more facts and stats you can give them gives them certainty. And the final thing I was going to say with this was another one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was that at the end of the day, you have to remember that actually funders need you as much as you need them. And I know it never seems that way because we're always chasing funding. We're always trying to make them happy. But funders exist to give out money. That's why they're there. If no one wants their money, then they have no purpose in life. So they want to receive good applications that speak to what they want to do because they want to give out money. So again, going to that idea of the person sitting there with a big long pile of applications, how can they pick yours up, read it and go, that is precisely what we want to give money to. This is a good day. This is exactly what we want to do. It is a relationship that goes both ways. So, even when you're churning out applications and seems like it's never ending, just remember they need you as much as you need them. Just help them realize why you can help them achieve what it is that you want to achieve.
It's making their job easier. I think to try and hit those bases.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.